probably get ready to call the meeting to order in a moment here.
All right.
I'd like to call to order the September 13th, 2021 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. If you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone who is here joining us in person this evening, as well as everyone who's joining us remotely. The board held an executive session prior to this meeting regarding personnel. Board members with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda as presented? Okay. Then at this time, Dr. O'Donnell will now review some housekeeping items regarding our hybrid format.
Thank you, Amber. We are here at the College Township Municipal Building as our boardroom at Panorama Village has been transformed into a fifth grade classroom for the school year. This is a result of expanded enrollments at Mountain Indy Elementary School. So we appreciate College Township for allowing us to utilize their space as it includes a live feed for CNET. For our audience this evening, 30 minutes will be provided at the beginning of the meeting for public comment for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. If additional time is necessary, the board may consider reopening public comment after board business is completed or during our next meeting. For action items, public comment will be held just prior to voting on that item as required by school code. This approach also allows for comments to be informed by the presentation and board's discussion of the respective items. Each individual will be limited to two comments of 2 minutes. This evening, we will not have a timer displayed, so we'll notify you at the conclusion of your 2 minutes. We'll have that rectified for next meeting. During the meeting, the IT help desk is available. If those viewing remotely encounter any technical difficulties, you may contact us at itsupport@scasd.org or give us a call at 814-231-7743. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. At this time, we'll have a roll call of board members.
Dr. Bader.
Here.
Ms. Bedell. Here. Ms. Brandt.
Here.
Ms. Concepcion.
Here.
Dr. Duffy.
Here.
Mr. Fazzard.
Here.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Here.
Mr. Leos.
Here.
Ms. Sidney.
Here. Okay, thank you. And at this time, we have the superintendent's update. Dr. O'Donnell.
I'd first like to do it in reverse order so I could share some congratulations. This year's Grange Fair was a huge success for State College Little Lions FFA chapter members, and I'd like to share some of their accomplishments. Thank you to our agricultural teacher, Morgan Inhofe, for her continued support of our agricultural program in our high school, as well as for helping us celebrate student accomplishments. Congratulations to State High 11th grader and chapter historian, Maddie Stoichev, for being crowned the 2021 Center County Grange Fair Queen. Her duties throughout the fair weekend included networking with fairgoers, distributing banners to livestock exhibitors, and introducing fair events, as well as numerous other activities. I'd like to congratulate Marissa Bilyeu, who was awarded the title of 2021 Supreme Showman. This recognition is given to a junior showman who proves to be the most capable showing all livestock. The following chapter members earned Grand Champion or Reserve Champion recognitions for their animals: Marissa Bilyeu, Katie Ripka, Grace Royer, Rebecca Royer, and Kylie Simpson. And finally, the chapter itself earned a first place with its exhibit of the history of FFA official dress. So congratulations to all those students. And now I'd like to address a different matter regarding the fair. The board and district administration team has received many questions about why the school year starts before the fair ends. This is something we've considered for many years. We understand that taking care for and showing animals, being with family, and other activities is a long-standing tradition for some of our students from the agricultural community, and we respect the commitment those activities require. That's why we consider the participation at the fair to be an educational trip experience in lieu of school attendance. This year, our attendance records showed that we had 27 students who missed school to attend the fair. On average, each student missed a little less than 2 days. This year, our school year started on the 5th day of the fair, which resulted in our students being able to attend 5 of the 9 days of the fair without missing school. Our challenges include the fact that the fair is now longer, as well as our largest employer, Penn State, begins earlier. Neither matter makes it easier to determine the best school calendar for our community. Ultimately, our approach is to consider learning opportunities for the most students possible, and we wrestle with these issues throughout that process. Because we have experienced higher levels of absenteeism when we have held school during Penn State spring break and when school goes later into June, and we believe that school days during the end of August, at least some, are a little more valuable than the student learning with the alternatives. So I just wanted to share that because I know board members have been getting pinged with questions. I had some updated information, and I hope that sheds a little light on to some of those questions. Board members, do you have any questions of me at this time regarding that?
Laura?
Was there anything in particular, previously, I had understood that we started late this year because the day of Labor Day was so late. That's why we started during the fair. Previously, though, when the dates were similar, we started on the 30th. Is there a particular reason that we weren't able to do that this year?
Well, as I shared with you, when our largest employer starts and you consider what's more valuable, either that week when we did start, which we didn't start on that Monday, we started on that Tuesday, but it did conflict for 4 of the days of the fair. If you consider that day, the value of that day with the alternatives that I mentioned, later in June or the spring break week, because really, where would you put the 4 days, right? We have the data from when we used to go for some of the days during the spring break week, and then every year, the later we go into June, the amount of absenteeism grows as we move into June. So, and that one's kind of a moving target just because we don't know what type of winter we're going to get. But there's no doubt that those are the big decisions. Where would you move the days? And, you know, when we look out, because Penn State has its calendar noted, and the fair has, at least we know when the fair is going to happen based on their new updated practices. So we are going to have a challenge next year with this. So,
Jim?
I think depending on where Labor Day falls, we're either going to not overlap at all or overlap by 4 days because we start on that Tuesday.
Right.
So that
Right.
Tuesday either falls during the second half of Grange Fair or it doesn't, and then it's after it. So, you know, it seems like in the last maybe 5 years, most years we've made it work.
It's been a mix depending on when Labor Day was.
I don't- I think we have a couple more years before it shifts, as you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
We've started mapping it out a little beyond next year, but I know next year we have a pretty similar problem.
Yeah.
Dan?
One of the things that might be worth mentioning is the fact that when we design the calendar every year, we have a large committee of individuals who participate in that, involving classroom teachers and administrators, families. So there's an effort to really be as collaborative as possible. And that process begins in October or November, and then we learn about the proposals as they develop through into February almost. So this is an ongoing process through the first third of the year.
You know, there's a lot of voices there. It's not always unanimous. And the policy says the superintendent recommends a calendar. And sometimes I'll make a tweak based on the feedback that's mixed on that team. Like, does it start Wednesday or Tuesday or Monday?
Yeah.
Right? So, but they do give feedback on this very matter. There's no question that it does have a wide range of perspectives on the team. The team isn't charged to create the final calendar. It's to give input to the calendar, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because we want to give other people voice too beyond that team.
I just wanted to mention that it was
Yeah.
an attempt to be representative of many stakeholders in the system.
Thanks, Dan.
Right, including a number of
Let me
community
add to that
religious-
question.
Right.
Is there a way for community members or anyone to give input to the calendar committee? Is there a way to give input to the calendar
Sure.
committee?
I mean, obviously, the emails that I get that go to you, they go to the assistant superintendents who chair that committee. So you can send it to me, to CJ and Danielle, which I would prefer sending to me since it's their first time with that. And I'll help them out this year as we transition. And you know, obviously, if you have somebody that you know in the committee and communicate directly with them what you're, but for some of the people who sent information to you, I've offered up conversations, and the board has a community outreach coming up, so if someone wants to talk to the board about that. Obviously, the board has the final vote on the calendar. That's their role, and you're welcome to come to the upcoming community outreach that the board is hosting to talk with board members.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, I have one more
Yeah.
item, sorry. The next item that I have really is a pandemic update, and I know Jean's online with us. This is really kind of our status. Right now in relationship to cases, we've had 4 cases over the weekend, so we have 24 student cases, 5 employee cases. Vaccine update, we have over 1,800 students that voluntarily shared their vaccine cards with us. So they're a little more than half of our eligible students who've been vaccinated that we're aware of. We believe the number's a little higher than that. We will be announcing another CVIM on-site clinic coming up, and one of the data points up above, we have about 85% of our faculty have reported to us their vaccination, and we're glad to see that, obviously, and hoping that our community continues to climb there. So as we collaborate with CVIM, we'll be communicating that to employees and families regarding another clinic here late this month, I believe, Randy, is that correct? The clinic that we're going to offer will be late this month?
Yes, last week of September.
Okay. So obviously, we want to make sure that we can provide all students with in-person learning, and so we'll continue with our mitigation strategies. We continue to meet with the health and safety team on a weekly basis to review different things, contact tracing included. And obviously, it's showing an uptick in county numbers, and we're seeing some numbers as well. And one of the tough things is that we see relates to the contact tracing and quarantine requirements. And so we want to make sure we keep up our vigilance with our protocols. And thus far, we're doing pretty well overall, but we need to keep up with it so that we can keep kids in. Thank you. And we'll take any questions. I believe Jean's online there.
Questions from board members? All right.
I just, clarification, so you said 85% of the staff is vaccinated or 85%
Faculty.
reported? Or the faculty?
Yeah, faculty
Okay.
is a little higher than our support
Okay.
staff.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, so then, moving forward with communications, David and Lori, do you have any legislative updates?
So I can briefly mention the PSBA's Legislative Advisory Committee met last week, and the main topic of conversation was trying to address the fact that even though we have, as everyone here knows, that we have well over 400 school districts in the Commonwealth that have passed resolutions in favor of reforming the charter school legislation that was passed 20 years ago. There's very little movement in the legislature currently. It's not something they seem particularly interested in, so we're wondering how we could get, what we could do, what strategy could be used in order to move this forward. And there were a couple of suggestions involving whether we can reach out to the community, particularly PTAs and PTOs. They are people that are very involved in education, and if we could develop talking points for them and, and give them some training, maybe let them meet with, people in the district and the administration. That was one idea that came forward. And then there was another one from another district that talked about, if I could find it here, brand ambassadors, which is another version of that, people that, we could prepare to be advocates for public education in general. And I just think that the general sense was that legislatures, there's a spot for hearing from parents and community people. For some reason, school members, board members are on the outs right now. It's hard to explain why, but that might be an avenue forward for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, David. We spend well over $6 million a year out of our budget, and it although our programs haven't taken a hit, it really is a zero sum on taxpayers, because as we have increased costs, that increases our bills to the charters, including the cyber charters, which obviously our tuition rate, it doesn't cost that to offer a full online program to a student. And I don't understand how we get movement there other than, seeing if our community would engage more. It's a tough one because I don't think the average parent sees or makes the connection, how do they motivate to, because I don't think when resources leave our community and our community doesn't have a voice in how those are used, and we're almost all locally funded, how do we engage people? So maybe that's a question we can have when we have our outreach conversations.
I think that's a really positive idea. I don't, if it was really clear in people's heads how much of their tax dollars are misspent because of the way the legislation is written. And in fact, I should have mentioned there's also PSB came out with a closer look talking about special education payments for charter schools and how because of the way the current legislation is written, if you're so inclined to as a charter school, you can game the system and just drain tax dollars into your pocket, essentially, as we know from experience here. So these are the kinds of tweaks to the legislation that are well overdue. And I think generally speaking, the public is not really clear about how that works.
So for anyone who's listening in and interested in learning more about this issue, I think the PSBA website, Pennsylvania School Board Association, their website, which is psba.org, has a lot of information on the financial aspect of this. All right. Lori, did you have anything else to add in terms of legislative?
To add in terms of the content of that meeting, but I will say that I think the problem is that there's a conflation that happens, that anytime we talk about charter schools, there's an assumption that we're talking about eliminating charters. That's not what this is about. This is about reimagining the funding formulas and adjusting to the new landscape of charter schools, and acknowledging the local control that is absent from these. So those two concepts get conflated in that we need to separate that.
Right, agreed. Okay. All right, any questions about this, Jim?
No questions.
Oh,
I just
okay,
had
did you?
something else.
A different communication item?
Yeah.
Okay, let me do the
Sure.
COG update first. Gretchen, do you have a COG update?
Yes, I do. So there are two items that I wanted to communicate that are in the interest of the school district pertaining to what COG has been up to lately. And the first is that many of you are aware that the COG has been working on a climate action and adaptation plan. You'll hear them refer to it as CAP, the CAP. That's what they're talking about. And you probably remember, and some of you took the survey, but there was a survey sent out, and they got a really good response. And the goal was to find out what the community wants to be a part of the climate action and adaptation plan. So what's important locally within the center region to be in this plan. And then there was also a community forum, which I attended, that was, again, gathering from the community what the desires are in terms of what concentration should be in this plan. And so now it's almost complete. Pam Adams, who is the sustainability director at the COG, has been working on this. And what's happening now is that she is collecting information, or I guess goals and interests of different municipalities for what they would like to see in the plan. And so in October, she's actually attending different municipal meetings. One question I had for the board is, would we like to invite Pam Adams to come to, whether it's a committee meeting or a board meeting, to get input from the school district on what should be in the climate action and adaptation plan for the center region? Would we be interested in giving that input to her like she's visiting the other municipalities? Would we like to do that on our own in email, which I'll just say for the record, when we've done that in the past, we've gotten 0 responses. So maybe in person might be more effective. So, I don't know, Amber, do you want to take care of that, or
Do you
how
think
do
that
I
could be on
get the
the
answer?
upcoming facilities and grounds agenda?
Okay,
Yeah, I was just going to suggest a committee meeting that might, the pressure for time might be a little easier to engage.
Yeah. I think facilities and grounds would be a good place to have a
okay,
discussion.
and I'm not sure, she's doing this in October, so
Mhm.
if we have some meeting that's, before the end of October, then it sounds like it would probably work. So that was one question I had for you all. And then, well, I guess the second was just, other comments, that if we have comments on the plan, we need to get them to Pam. So you can also do that through email, if, it's just another way, but she's collecting information on what the school district's interests are in this regional climate action plan. So, okay, so that was the first. And then the second item is that I just wanted to let you all know that the general forum did vote unanimously to accept the authorization to retain Green Sky Development Group as the energy services consultant for the SPPA project. Other municipalities have already voted. College Township voted, that was unanimous. Those were the only two that I watched. It's must-see TV, by the way. No, really, I'm not being facetious. It's really interesting stuff. And so far, it seems like it's plugging along. And of course, tonight, our board will vote on that as well, the authorization of Green Sky to be the energy consultant for the services for that SPPA project. So those were the two items I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jim, you had a communication item?
Yeah, I just, Dr. O'Donnell alluded to it, but don't forget Friday at 8:30 a.m. is a board coffee with the community, and that's at Good Day Cafe, which is 286 West College, that's West Hamilton. That's Hamilton Plaza, right about where Hamilton meets South Atherton Street. And if you haven't been there, it's a great place to go. It's a lot of good things happening there. But we'll be there to talk to anybody about anything concerning the school district or your children's experience or anything like that. So please come, and we've got some, we pre-purchased some coffee, so that's good.
Coffee will be on hand.
Yes, coffee will be on hand. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. O'Donnell.
Great. Thank you. Board members, any other communication items? All right. Okay, then moving on to public comment. As Dr. O'Donnell indicated earlier, each individual is limited to comments of up to 2 minutes as time permits for items related to board business that are not on the action item portion of the agenda. And for action items, public comment will be held just prior to the voting on that item as required by school code. If additional time is necessary, the board might consider reopening public comment after board business is completed or during the next meeting. So I'll start with anyone who's here in the room, and we have a lectern up here with a microphone. You're welcome to come up and introduce yourself and where you reside in the district, and you'll have 2 minutes. Our timer is not working because of challenges with displaying projection right now, so Dr. Bader is going to keep track of time and wave to us when the time is up for each speaker. So, yes, so this is time for anyone, and if you're attending remotely, if you'd like to raise your hand using the raise hand function on Zoom, and I'll catch everyone who's here in the room, and then I'll move on to those who are joining us remotely. If anyone would like to make a comment. Sure, feel free, and come up. If you could introduce yourself and where you reside in the district. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Michelle Schellberg, and I reside in Port Matilda. I would just like to bring to your attention that the busing for keeping students separated in order so that they do not come into close contact with those infected with COVID has become an issue for my family. And I would really like to see it addressed in a way such that there's more busing provided, or there's a strategy that would prevent students being in close contact on the bus. And so I look forward to hearing ideas one idea that I have is maybe there's not money to afford more busing or we don't have more bus drivers, but
Right.
maybe assign seats, having the students pick a seat for the year and using that as a way to prevent different seating and different kids sitting next to different kids in the morning and then in the afternoon. My child's coming from Port Matilda. It's going to be greater than 15 minutes. She's not going to be vaccinated due to health issues. And I just can't, she's a top level student. She can't continue to miss school. She's out for at least 5 days now. And we just can't do this all year. So we'd have to find a different schooling option for her if this continues. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, anyone else here who would like to make a public comment at this time? Okay, then I'll move on to those who are viewing remotely. Is anyone who's joining us via Zoom who would like to make a public comment? You can raise your hand using the raised hand function. Okay. All right, so I don't see anybody seeking to make a public comment. So we'll move on then to routine approvals at this time. I'm sorry.
I think there's a,
I don't know other people are going as well.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, if you'd like to come up and introduce yourself and where you reside in the district.
Okay.
Thank you, Ari.
You're welcome. Hey, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. This is Ari residing in Boalsburg. This is my last year of the high school, and this is going to be really bittersweet for me. I really enjoy this. And thank you to everyone for helping me out this year. Also, I'm going to Penn State
Congratulations.
to be a special ed teacher, but it took a long time for me to apply, but I figured it out. Also, I want to say that thank you to Ms. Nonabot for everything that you do, and Ms. Autumn Moyer, and all of you guys for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ari.
you, Ari.
Thanks, Ari.
Okay, would anyone else like to make a comment? Okay. All right, then we'll move on to routine approvals. I'd like a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
Leah so moved.
Duffy, second.
That's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on the routine approval items? Laurel?
Yes, I was checking on the tech renewals for tonight. It appears to be a new program, maybe it's not, but it sounds like it is. This Frax is listed, and I was wondering what it is and why it's being added, and also it's unclear what that purchase cost covers. And I thought I had printed that out so I could see the actual number under there, but it's in with Reflex, with Math Reflex. It's the question I had sent in earlier.
49,114.
Oh, okay. And this is under curriculum.
Yep.
So it says,
But it's on the tech, routine approvals for technology.
yes.
And my reason for asking is just that it's a higher amount and not being sure what the 2 years are, and it includes an addition, not just the renewal, and so that was what I was
I
asking.
understand it's part of the Reflex tool and focuses on fractions.
Oh, so it's like adding a fraction component to our
Yeah.
reflex.
Deirdre just weighed in.
Oh, okay.
So it's tied up, it's not a whole new thing, it's
Part of
another
Reflex, yeah.
program or whatever is part of that. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Deirdre.
All right, any other questions on routine approvals? Is there any public comment in regard to the routine approval item? Any public comment from those attending remotely? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Okay, that is passed. Dr. O'Donnell, I know you wanted to congratulate our new hires.
Oh, yes. I'd like to yes, sorry. Thanks, Deirdre. I'd like to congratulate our new principals that were just hired, Susan Lunsford at Easterly Parkway Elementary School, Brett Wilson, who's our new high school associate principal, Danielle Ambrosia and Jackie Saylor, our new high school assistant principals. So congratulations and thank you very much to the board as well.
Yeah, welcome to your new roles. We're really excited to have you. Okay, then under action items, item A is a motion to retroactively approve the change of location for the remaining 2021 Board of School Director meetings as shown in attachment 6A.
Bader, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion from the board? Thank you to College Township for offering this space to us. Is there any public comment on this item? All right, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes. Okay, that item has passed. Item B is a motion to approve the election of PSBA officers and insurance trust trustees, as shown in attachment 6B, but to be clear, we'll need a motion on a specific president-elect because there's a choice of one of two of the candidates. So I think maybe before we make a formal motion, it would be helpful to have David explain as our PSBA representative what.
Sure. So without getting too deep in the weeds, I was at the interview committee where we interviewed candidates for this, and many of you know Sabrina. She's been involved in the organization for a long time, has been very active over the years. She did not interview particularly well, but nevertheless, the other candidate is relatively new to PSBA and has not had a lot of activity or a lot of experience. And so based on that and the fact that, I do know Sabrina to some extent and I have respect for her, my suggestion, my recommendation that we nominate and approve Sabrina as president-elect.
And with the insurance trust trustees, we do vote for 3 out of 3?
Right, that's
Okay.
correct.
All right.
So
Would you
we
like to
need a
make a
second?
motion then?
Is it-
A formal motion?
Sure, I can make that motion to approve the nominees that are presented with Sabrina Becker as being president-elect. Did I get that right?
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Okay, any questions or discussion on that motion?
The only,
Laurel?
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Laura. Well, I just chimed in. I didn't ask for to be recognized. The reviewing their self-descriptions and the materials we received, one of the differences between them showed Sabrina to take more of a values-based approach to thinking about her proposed or prospective role as a president-elect. She was talking about the importance of supporting public education and described it as a foundation for everything we do, and where the other candidate talked about it in terms of just going to work, in terms of their approach to the role that they would play. And it was, of the two, I thought that Sabrina's offered a rationale, which was really supportive of the importance of public education and the importance of the school boards in supporting them, those processes and those operations. Thank you.
Laura?
Dan answered the question. He didn't know I was going to ask, which really was if you knew anything, because I hadn't had a chance to actually watch the video, but about their rationale, so for running, and you answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I certainly have a sense with the PSBA president role that the institutional experience is really important in this role.
It is.
To be able to be effective in the role. So.
You're not there very long, and to be able to hit the ground running is kind of important.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. We'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Fazzard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Okay. That item has passed. Item C is a motion to approve policy 707, facility use, and this is shown in attachment 6C.
Vidal, so moved?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this Yes, Scott?
Yeah, so I just wanted to confirm, because in discussion in the memo comments about a review of the fee schedule and basically kicking it back to the administration to monitor,
Right.
which is fine. I just want to confirm that no other changes in the policy were made subsequent to that conversation, that it was just a conversation about having the administration have the responsibility for monitoring.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So-
There were, as far as the regulations, which are attached, which you are not approving per se, but they're there for information, they have been slightly modified from their inclusion in the original policy that was last modified, but it's mostly to make them more up-to-date, knowing that we have an electronic system and we have some different ways of doing things now. But other than that, the policy is identical.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard?
Yes.
Okay, that item has been approved. Item D is a motion to approve policy 815.2, IT data backup and retention, and this is shown in attachment 6D.
Duffy, so moved.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. We have Linda at the table here to answer any questions. We've talked about this policy a few times now. Yeah. Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Okay, that item has been approved. Item E is a motion to approve policy 100.2, gender expansive and transgender individuals, ensuring equity and non-discrimination. This is shown in attachment 6E.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion from board members? We have Linda here who is involved with the policy development process, and Mr. Johnson as well.
I already asked all my questions at the committee meeting, so I'm all set.
All right. Is there any public comment?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Laurel.
Yeah, I did have a comment. I had asked some questions last time, and this time before the policy committee meeting, I sent in some comments, and I'm basically just going to reiterate some of what I said quickly, which is that I agree with the general sense of the policy in terms of respect for students and for promoting that throughout our district. We already have 2 policies which address that, the inclusive excellence policy and the, it's 103. And I'm a little nervous speaking, frankly. So it's 103. And it specifically mentions gender identity as one of the things again, which we do not discriminate against. So it is included specifically in there. So we have those policies already, and my concern with this policy is that to then step out and do a specific policy for one group sets a real precedent for similar policies that would affirm our commitment and direct development of regulations pertaining to, just for example, students born in other countries, students of historically underrepresented races, ethnicities, students for whom English is not a first language, students of minority faiths. So there are any number of subgroups that we cover already along with this group in our policies. And for that reason, I'm very uncomfortable with this use of policy. I couldn't vote for a policy that said we will not respect these things. That would be different from what we have. But we already have policies that pertain to all of our students.
Any other questions or?
Yeah, I wanted to give a little background because I filled in for Lori and chaired the committee meeting where this and the next policy we're going to vote on came through. And for the community's sake, I just wanted to share some information about how these policies kind of got reorganized at the committee meeting because Linda and CJ did a great job of kind of sorting out. We had had some previous conversations about the regulations and that they were largely comprehensive in how they fit with which portions and which policies. So they came up with a great solution in that policy that we're about to vote on, 100.2, is it? Is kind of a more overarching, deals with our whole SCASD community, but mostly employees. And then policy 251 is specifically more about students. And so the administrative regulations have been packaged and bundled with that, because that's an area where we felt it made the most sense, that there was administrative techniques and things that would have to be codified and spelled out. So there was that. I'm pleased to support both these policies enthusiastically. I think that whenever we have a group that's clearly been demonstrated to be dealing with significant and even potentially life-threatening sequela to their status in our community, that it's imperative on us to speak up on what needs to be done to keep them safe and give them the fair level playing ground and opportunities that every student in our district deserves. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
To the point of where these came from, Laurel, we weren't able to clearly answer employees, including faculty member, questions about what does the board think about some specifics, and in particular, such a unique student population. And that's really where this, came from. We want to make sure there's clear direction around one of the most unique, because you routed off other challenging marginalized populations in our community. They're very different. And so that's really where this came from. When, back when we were talking about this in the spring, Vern had iterated that at a committee meeting. So I just wanted to reflect on how do we come to requesting policies to give us some direction relating to gender expansive and transgender kids. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I'd like to also, and historically, the board has had conversations about whether a policy was appropriate to address this issue in the past. So this is not, it came from both angles is what I wanted to say. Yep. That there really is, I think, a large amount of cohesion in terms of the desire to make this all these issues clear. Because I know Gretchen and I had some discussions after some professional development learning that we had done about what was the right path in our district to support these students. And so, yeah, it's been kind of an iterative process over the last 3 or 4 years.
Gretchen?
I'll just add quickly, I've already said this in a full board meeting and a committee meeting, so I'm not going to say it a third time, but I'll just say that, reiterate what Dr. O'Donnell said, that I also am aware of instances in the district where teachers didn't know exactly what to do, and they were looking for guidance because there was no policy. And so to just leave it without, their questions would not be answered. And so it's, I think, comfortable and comforting to know that now there's going to be guidance within the policies to know what to do. And that's better than not knowing what to do, which has been occurring. So.
And we have a draft of the admin regs here where that's really a lot more than nuts and bolts for example, in many instances with teacher, but you can have a sense of how aligned we are with what you would be approving. And that is draft. So we're working with counselors and employees, so that is evolving, and obviously Scott Etter. We did not get for the first policy for this one, we did one reg, but we have a lot of work to do. We really are focused on students at this point. We have a lot of work to do to help with employees that fall under these policies.
Laurel? Or Scott? I'm sorry,
I think Laurel's question is valid, but I also don't think that the policy flies in the face of what we already have, as a policy. So, while I don't think it's necessary, I also don't think it's at all harmful or that it goes against something that we currently have. And if we as a school board and the administration choose to make a point of emphasis on something that, that we see, then a policy or a resolution, or, those are avenues and vehicles that we have. So again, I mean, I agree with you, Laurel. I think that it is clearly, stated in other policies that we don't discriminate against any group. But I also don't think it's problematic to say, this is one that we want to spell out separately. And if we end up, for whatever reason, with 27 different policies relative to, non-discrimination language and things like that for different groups, then that's what we end up with, and those are all points of emphasis. So, that would be my, I understand where you're coming from. I agree, but I don't think this is, problematic from that standpoint. So.
Any other comments? Pardon?
Do you want to ask the student representative?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to make sure Rick had a chance to weigh in as well as a student rep, if you want to.
Okay, so I kind of pretty much agree with exactly what Ozark said right here, that I don't think that this policy will necessarily create any sort of harm. I think our school district has had a really good reputation with this, especially having so many groups from like different communities, especially with this. Like, I don't think that there have been major issues with this certain problem, but of course it's always easier if somebody has, like, if there's a student who needs something and there's something that's set in stone. So I think that this policy would help with that, and I think there's like no harm to it, is what I'm saying.
Thank you. And I think one of the things we had heard earlier in the policy development process from parents of students who were part of this category of students, and from students themselves, as well as former faculty member who was able to reflect on what she was aware of from a fact, not from a personal perspective, but understanding other faculty members' perspectives perhaps in this issue area, that it was simply helpful to have to have a place to start putting some procedural clarity in place, and so that parents would know where to look for, procedural clarity on some of these issues. So, and sort of it ensures that there's cohesion, with students and parents and the school district on knowing, at least to have a basis for where we're starting when we're developing potentially individual plans for students around these issues. So, Laurel?
One just question. Are you anticipating regulations that will be attached to this as well? To 100.2?
Suri and I were talking about employees, and if we do, we'll obviously, if we change regulations or create regulations, we'll notify the board so that you have a sense of how it's aligned. But we don't have a separate regulation at this time for this. What we did was we developed the regulation for the next action item at this time.
And then just two other quick points. I heard and I read that we took the students out of this one, except it specifically says maximizing social integration with other students. So that seems to be students. I think that's pretty clear. And in terms of, I appreciate what you said in terms of, as our superintendent, aware of the issues in the school, if there are concerns that teachers, I'm not sure what to do. I just find myself thinking, well, if a teacher says to you, may I downgrade the students' grades because they skipped school, and they told me it was a religious holiday, but can't I hold them accountable for having to skip school? We refer to our policies that say we don't discriminate against students based on that. And I would think that if there were issues about students missing opportunities or being excluded for any of that very long list, the answer, even if we did not have this policy, should be that we work to maximize the potential and the experiences of all students.
I mean, I do hear you,
Yeah,
Laura. I think one of the things that these policies do is looks to students who really, I think, feel like they're on the outside looking in and says, we got you. And I think it also tells us, all of us, we have over, 1,400 employees, and we all, to get us all on the same page on an issue that's pretty complex. I think this really zeroes in on it. It does. And I don't think this is a small step, but I think it's an important step.
Lori?
Well, Dr. O'Donnell sort of said, in a sense, what my point was going to be, and that is that, to those students, it says, we've got you. And what we heard from students about these policies, this one and 251, was that they didn't feel sure that we had them, that we were equipped in terms of policy and regulations to take care and address all of the needs that their identities require. And what this does is it assures them that we see them, that they have, that they're valid, and they have the right to be who they are in the district. And I think that because of the relative newness of the visibility and the willingness of this community to be who they are, we have to make sure we're making way and providing them space to feel safe in that way. And I think, as I said last meeting, we will get to a place in time when we can take this for granted, but we're not anywhere near that place where, the larger society doesn't speak to it. And so to make our students and staff feel okay to be who they are in this community, I think is a huge step for them.
Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, I won't be too much of a dead horse, but I think you're right. I think that, I don't want to say newness, because individuals like this have existed for centuries.
Right.
No, I know the newness, I know that's what you meant. I wanted to clarify for the larger, the awareness and the provision of supports. And I think that's where it falls differently than some of the other groups that fall within our inclusive excellence policy. But let's be honest, even some of those groups within our more overarching policies, while we have anti-bullying or anti-discrimination, there still can be inhibition of families and students to seek out pathways for their rights to be supported. And because of what Lori commented on, that's highly exacerbated for this group of people. So we know it exists for many different subgroups or marginalized populations in our community, but this one in particular is highly sensitive. And I think that's why it's aside from the administrative and logistical parts, it's really important that we as a board state up front that we affirm this community in particular.
I think to the question of whether it's reasonable or helpful to have potentially multiple policies that are related to our inclusive excellence policy that might address the needs of specific groups who are already mentioned in that policy. I think as we've worked on our inclusive excellence initiative and equity efforts in the district and forming these working groups that have parents and students and other community representatives of various potentially marginalized groups in our schools, it might be that over the next few years, we'll hear from other working groups about specific needs related to their identity or their background that haven't yet been well covered in policy. I mean, that potential is there as well. And I think the question about religious holidays is potentially an apt one. Like maybe, it's not hard to imagine requests about, covering that more clearly as well. So, I think because of the structure that's been created with these working groups, that's helped, I think, bring some of these more specific questions or concerns to our attention. So, okay. Any other? Okay. then I'll open it up to public comment. I'll start with those who are here in the room, if anyone would like to make a public comment on this item. Okay, if you'd like to come up to the podium and introduce yourself and where you reside in the district, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
My name is Alana Chesney, and I reside in Boalsburg. And I guess I'll comment on this policy as well as the next one. I'm a co-chair for the LGBTQ and Gender Equity Work Group. I support the passing of these policies, which I believe will help to ensure that all of our students have a safe and welcoming educational environment. As many have discussed tonight, there is, an increasing visibility of our trans and gender expansive students in our district. And I think we will really benefit from the guidance provided in these policies and administrative regulations to create awareness and meet the particular and unique needs of these students. And I think beyond, and in addition to the anti-discrimination feature, I wanted, to highlight things that I really appreciated being added in, including things like athletics. And also specific to things like facility use that are really particular to the needs of this population, separate from perhaps the needs of other marginalized student populations. And I guess just to point out what maybe has already been shared a little bit, we know that transgender students are at greater risk for victimization, more likely to be the victims of bullying and harassment, which can lead to greater mental health concerns. Research shows that LGBTQ students who experience victimization and discrimination have lower educational aspirations, lower grades, and higher absenteeism. And importantly, research shows that providing trans individuals with support can buffer some of these adverse consequences. And again, to sort of reiterate some of the points made tonight, I really strongly feel that this policy tells our trans and gender expansive students that we see you, we care about you, and we will protect you. I just want to thank the board for your work and your discussion on these policies. I want to thank the members of the policy committee who heard the needs of our students and worked to develop these policies. I want to thank our students who bravely shared their stories that helped to elucidate the experience of students in our schools. I want to thank our administration and the others who generated the administrative regulations that provide some clear direction for faculty, staff, and administration to meet the needs of our students. I also want to thank Dr. Chatters and the members of the LGBTQ and Gender Equity Work Group, and those like Sue Marshall who have been working for years to bring to bring these issues forward, and who persisted in working towards the passing of these policies. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, would anyone else like to? Yes, you're welcome. If you'd like to introduce yourself and where you reside in the district, and then you'll have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. My name is Spencer Chesney. I live in Boalsburg, and I'd just like to thank the previous speaker for also, or second, her thanking all of the people that put all the great effort to getting the policy to this point. And I guess I just wanted to kind of address the comments and the discussion that was going on here for a second. And I totally agree that in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to carve out a specific policy for this particular group. And we wouldn't need an additional policy at all for transgender or gender expansive students. But obviously we don't live in an ideal world, and as I think the previous speaker talked to, that there's, and I think a lot of people have already mentioned, there's unique protections and guidance and needs for transgender students in particular. And so this policy appropriately has those targeted students in mind as it targets the policy directly towards them. And I'll be frank, I think in many ways, sometimes this goes unnoticed, but it's quite possible that this policy will save a child's life. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. And so I think from that perspective, this policy is actually a great example of how an equity-focused lens can actually provide the equality of treatment that we would like to see in an ideal world. I'd also like to acknowledge that, this policy isn't perfect. I'm speaking solely for myself. So I would wish that some of the language that's existed in the administrative regulations or in the policy directly, and I understand that there was a lot of legal and potentially political considerations that needed to be taken in place. And so as written, having a lot of the documents, and this is for the policy 251 with the administrative regulations, requires that we have faith in our superintendents and our assistant superintendents and our principals and our coaches and our counselors. I'd just like to say that the administration's courage and the courage that I think a lot of the board has in supporting this policy has earned my personal faith on that issue. And I'd like to acknowledge that by passing this policy, another thing that this policy will do is you'll be protecting students by redirecting hostility within the community off of their backs and onto yours. And I understand that that is not an easy thing to do, but it also is extremely important. And I'll have faith that you'll keep this in mind beyond today when there's instances where a teacher, it's in the policy, so obviously when a teacher refuses to respect a student's chosen name, but also when a community member objects to having a gender-expansive book read in class, or when a community member objects to participation of a transgender student in sports. And so I think the passage of this policy is a great step. But true progress is going to be measured by the empathic and courageous implementation of this policy. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone else who's here in attendance like to make a public comment? Yes, if you'd like to come up to the podium and introduce yourself and where you reside in the district.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jeremy Field, and I reside in Patton Township. And first, I'd like to say good evening. Thank you for the opportunity tonight to share a comment with you. I have 3 children who are all in the district, and I think the district does a fantastic job of teaching them, and I really appreciate that. I also want to thank you for the opportunity to just take a moment to share what might be seen as an opposing thought or view, just a little bit on some of the particulars of the policy. I appreciate that. And again, first, I'd like to say that any of my comments tonight are, please understand, not intended to be seen as demeaning towards any student or family that would express that they are supportive of any of these policy changes. I believe it's important that every family and student's voice be heard, and that the district should aim to do what's in the best interest of the families and the students that it serves, as I know is your desire as well. In listening tonight, there's probably some things that I'm certainly not aware of from past discussions and things on this. But I was just curious if the district or the board, sounds as if you may have already done this, but done maybe some focus groups, maybe some sort of a large scale research that would represent every diverse aspect of this community, and then make that information from the district available to everyone to hear what I would say maybe the voice of the entire community on some of these proposed policy changes, some of the specific details. I would just like to ask that maybe it's important that the board or the district just pause and realize some of the deep and significant changes that it's proposing for all of the families in our community. These policy changes would not only impact those who choose to desire to be able to express gender identity status, but these policy changes would also, in some ways, significantly impact every family and child in our community in some other ways. And I understand there's an acute felt need by the district to address these concerns that you guys are aiming to address here. These are issues that are certainly being discussed by school districts all across our nation in the current climate of our country. Yet, I know that there's I would say, a decent part of our community that's not going to be supportive of some of the details that are in these proposed policy changes. And I just feel that there's a potential, in some ways, maybe an unnecessary headache for the district potentially coming down the road. And I think, just maybe to summarize, I think some of the things that might cause some indigestion for some folks is that some of the policy changes would impact the moral conscience of some of our students and their families. And so I would just ask that maybe the school district might consider maybe just a pause, or maybe I'd be happy to listen to some things if you have to address some of these concerns. But I would just say I think that some of the particulars are too far weighted in one direction, and I think.
Thank you for your comments, sir.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, is anyone else who's here in attendance who would like to make a public comment? Okay. I'll move on then to the attendees. I see Hester Bloom has her hand raised. If you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Oh, we're not able to hear her. Let's see.
I hear really quiet.
That's not going to work. Does anyone know how to get the Zoom audio to feed through? When I turn, maybe I should turn this on. Yours is on. Yours was on.
And myself, am I legible?
Now we can hear you.
And try again, does that?
Try. Okay, would you like to try?
I don't want to shatter.
Just a moment, we're gonna try and figure this out. Sorry. Do you think it would help if I set my computer next to the speaker here, or the microphone here? No, I don't.
Okay.
Okay, if you would like to try again now to introduce yourself. We have a microphone next to another laptop. So Hester, if you'd like to speak.
Can you hear me now? Is this working now?
This is working.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all for your patience and for the opportunity to weigh in virtually. I'm speaking from the perspective of a parent of a trans child who is currently a 10th grader at State High and who had fought to send my child to State High because I knew there were explicit indicators of the district's support of trans and gender diverse students. As many of the board members have noted, this can be a matter of life and death for students. We have been fortunate that at State High, my child has found not just an inclusive and warm and welcoming student body, but teachers and administrators. And that has allowed for conditions of thriving for my child in ways that we couldn't even have hoped when they first came out to us as trans about 5 years ago. And the importance of those kinds of policies, and I appreciate board members' indicators that giving teachers some guidance is really crucial. The fact that my child could have their chosen name and their identity listed in their district communications has eased the transit that they have made into the district and eased their transition into their fullest expression of their selfhood. It's not a battle that a kid should have to fight. And so I'm really grateful to the district for enabling conditions to allow my child to thrive and not have to fight against conditions that are hostile. And when it comes down to hostility, there are interpersonal hostilities, but one of the things that the district has always done a great job of is creating conditions that are welcoming to learning and not hostile to learning. And for children who have to fight to have their names and their pronouns and their access to the most basic bodily functions challenged are conditions that are hostile to learning, in addition to all of the moral issues they raise about intolerance. No child is harmed by having these policies in place. No families are disrupted. They're only supportive, and and I'm happy to offer my perspective as a parent whose child could not be happier as an out trans kid at State High. And I thank you for the work that you've all done.
Thank you for your comments. I see Tamar London has her hand raised. If you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, we can hear you. Thank you. Whoops, I think she's muted again. Oh, there we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Tamar London. I live in Lamont, and I am on the board of the Center LGBTQA Support Network, and also I served on the LGBT and Gender Equity Work Group that helped propose these policies. I want to point out that the name of the committee was had equity and not equality in its title. Equity is very different from equality. We might say that a student in a wheelchair, we don't need to name a specific policy for them because it's obvious what, non-discrimination looks like. In this particular case, this group of students, it's not just about treating them like every other student. There are accommodations that they require. For example, access to the bathroom that makes them feel safe. Related to that, these policies arose to address a problem. It wasn't that there wasn't a problem, there were problems. There were problems of teachers misgendering students. There were problems where students refused to eat or drink because they were not permitted to use the bathroom that they needed to use. And as somebody alluded to earlier, it's great if we have the administration on board, as it appears we do, but we need to protect these students for all contingencies, for the possibility that an administrator would interpret what non-discrimination looks like in a very different way. Somebody might say it just means, they have access to the same bathroom that every other student has. That does not protect these students. They do not need equality. They need equity. And finally, I think the man who spoke earlier about opening it up to a community debate proves the point for why we need these policies, because they are what non-discrimination looks like varies, and we need people who understand the needs of this community and how to protect them. And opening it up to majority rule that may rule that they don't have access to the bathroom of their choice or they can be misgendered is exactly why we have to name these policies right now. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Carrie Weissman, I see your hand raised. If you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
I'm Carrie Weisman. I am a counselor at the Ferguson Township Elementary, also a resident in the Lamont area. My daughters went through State College Area School District. So I would like to say that I think that teachers are begging for guidance. We've already provided them with some supplies that they could use. For example, books that they could use for a read aloud in the elementary school. But they're not going to use them for fear that a parent is going to tell them that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And they don't know for sure that the administration and the school district, the board itself, has their back. Just because you're given something from somebody doesn't mean that if somebody doesn't like what you do, that the administration and the board will be behind you. So it's really important that we have a policy because this is specifically an issue in our society right now. Some people will still say that trans people don't really exist. They're just confused. And there's a whole wealth of conflict out there such that our youth are really burdened by the conflict that's going on in our society. We don't want them to carry that. We want them to know that we support them. And by passing this policy tonight, you will be letting every trans youth know that we got you, and every teacher in our school district who can and is able to do that, that the administration and this board has their back. It's a huge, in terms of, even as a school counselor, me wondering, well, what'll happen if I say such and such, right? I don't know until the board says, yes, you should do this. You should support these students. So I think it's real important. I so appreciate the fact that the board committee brought it forward, and really appreciate your time, taking the time to consider this policy. And I do hope that you pass it this evening. Thank you, friends.
Okay. Thanks for your comments. Is anyone else who is attending remotely who would like to make a comment? Okay. All right, seeing none, then we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Sidney?
Staying.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Moving on to item F is a motion to approve policy 251, gender expansive and transgender students. I'm sorry, this is same title on the agenda.
The other one was
251.
individuals, this one's. Yeah, there's two.
Oh, I'm
This is
sorry.
right.
Thank
You're
you.
right.
Gender expansive and transgender students, ensuring equity and non-discrimination. And this is shown in attachment 6F.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or discussion on this item?
So if I could just mention a technicality.
Sure.
I made a mistake. This should be policy 250, not 2, we already have a 250.
Oh, okay. So this would be policy
250.
250.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to turn that on. Nope. Yeah, okay, thank you, sorry. Okay, I saw Scott's hand raised first.
Yeah, so I think that, so this policy has administrative regulations attached to it. I think it's important for, assuming the board knows this, but for the public to understand that the board, per its policies, does not approve administrative regulations. And because of the nature of these regulations and because of the comments that were made previously and obviously some of the language in the proposed regulation is going to have a high level of agreement and disagreement within the community. I think that's just going to occur. My question is, obviously, we're not approving the administrative regulations, but is there a path for the community to be involved or to be engaged in how those regulations are developed or provide commentary, provide support, provide whatever it might be to try to engage the community in a conversation that gets them on not necessarily the same page, but a dialogue to understand where these regulations are coming from, what are legal requirements versus, our own desires or opinions or how we want to do things. So I think that this is very important because this specific action item, more than any other, I think, the way it was presented on the agenda makes it appear that the board is potentially approving the administrative regulation, but it's just attached as a draft. We are only approving the policy itself, which the previous policy and this policy are virtually identical. They're very, very close. As we said, one's for staff and one's for students. But again, I think it would be very helpful, whether now or in the future, to define for the community some way that they can engage or provide comment or be told, no, that's not your purview or that's not what we do, so that they fully understand that the rules that are coming into place associated with this regulation impact them in certain ways, and they do or do not have the ability to have their voices known on it.
I think in regard to the admin regs, I would request people talk with their child's counselor as well as their child's principal. Because of the discussion that someone's going to have with an assistant superintendent is going to be very different with an elementary age student than a high school age student in some instances. So, I mean, as we've looked around the district in regard to how might we best take a step forward with these regulations, we looked at different input from around our administrative team. There's conversations happening at this time with counselors. So in the discussions with families at the different levels is a little different as it is obviously with the academic world here too. So that would be my request for that. If we think a larger forum or something would be helpful, we could do that, but I do think they'd be more age appropriate and helpful to informing these, because the principals are responsible with our administrative team to help move forward with the operation side of it. So I think that would be most beneficial to help inform us, because then principals will weigh in with the assistant superintendents as well as our directors who are very involved in this, and then we'll have conversations around specific issues if we need to do something a little differently.
So thank you. So as a follow-up to that, so on the school side of things, I think that makes a lot of sense. A large portion of the regulation relates to athletics as well. Is that something that a community member would go to their principal on, or would you want them to go to the athletics director, and I use that very specifically because I'm sure that that's going to be a big question people have.
And with the athletic side, there obviously we have Dr. Ed involved as well. There are legal constraints to things on that side of things as well, as far as the extracurriculars. So and the athletic directors are very involved in this development. So I would think, parents should voice, if they have something regarding athletics, they want to talk to the athletic directors. That would allow us to monitor what questions that we need to help them with, or feedback that may help the regulations.
So thank you. I mean, I think that's important for people to understand that, this is what we're doing, and these are the avenues that they have to support, make their voices known, whatever it might be, because at the board table, it's not that we can't listen to these things, but we're not approving the regulation. We're not approving, the one piece on here that potentially provides the most angst for those who might not support it. So thank you.
And if there's, particularly when there's concerns specific to one's individual child, obviously, like the principal connection is really key there, right? It's helpful to understand that they're in feedback with the...
Yeah, I just want to be careful because I don't, and maybe I'm not totally hearing you appropriately, but I don't want to make it seem like to the public that the policy and the administrative regulator, sorry, I'm tongue-tied now. The administrative regulations and the policy are completely separate. When we started taking this path several years ago using the term administrative regulations, we had a lot of conversation about what did that mean, what were they, what belonged in there, what are we approving? And we talked a lot about that the expectation is administrative regulations will abide by the, I don't want to use the word spirit, but the overarching goals of the policy. So I understand what you're saying. If people have questions about very specific aspects of what's happening on the ground in schools, then yes, I agree that goes through administration or through appropriate individuals. But I just also don't want to give the impression that we're picking and choosing some of the stuff in the administrative regulations as a board. I mean, they're brought forward as this draft so that we understand, we have a better, more definitive understanding of the path that the administration is going to take in approaching how they resolve issues and how they deal with this policy. So I just, and that may not have been your intention, but just for anybody joining who hasn't heard some of these conversations about the difference between policy and regulation, they are intimately intertwined. They're not necessarily separate, but yes, it gives the administration flexibility to make modifications and changes as they need to, as things play out, as long as it maintains the spirit of the goal of the policy. And there was one more thing I wanted to say about, policy, and it is, when I joined the board policy is our legacy as a board in terms of what we value and what we think is important and where we think the direction of the school district needs to go. And certainly we craft that in conjunction and in collaboration with the administration. But it's significant, and so, I think it's really important that this is steps that we take forward.
Yeah, I just want to, this came to me earlier as we voted for the last action item, but I wanted to bring it up, and perhaps even more so now. And that is, just in having the conversations that we're having this evening, and we're hearing from the community and those who are calling in and those who are here in person to provide feedback to us, it just reinforces for me the fact that the needs of these students, the needs of these families, are for us maybe new. For me, this is an area of study which has only come forward in the last year and a half or 2 years as a board member. But these families have been living with these concerns for many, many years, and some have talked about as many as 5 years ago or longer ago, having to address the needs of their transgender and gender expansive children. And I think, this is the point I'm trying to make, I think because of that, the families have informed us. We have heard from them, and learned things from them that we would not otherwise take to heart or understand as well as we do now. And their work with other developmental specialists, like the specialists at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and the development of something called gender support plans. There's a number of technical things and I suppose technical aspects of the work involved in supporting these students, about which we would not otherwise be aware without the assistance of the families informing us. Now, I want to thank them. I mean, they really have been one of the primary leaders in our understanding the needs of their children and the needs of these students. So I just want to say that, and then that in a sense empowers us to look at these at a deeper level and to integrate the needs in support of equity, not equality, but in support of equity. Incorporate the support that these students need to be able to feel safe, to be able to make the progress that we want them to make as they move towards graduation. All these kinds of things are just ultimately come to us following the advocacy of their families to support their children. Just want to throw that in.
So I just had a quick question about specifically the administrative regulation, and that is that I'm not sure, I don't have too much knowledge on this, but is this the sort of regulations that would come into effect after the policy is passed? Because I know personally, like looking at some of the regulations, especially I guess the one about locker room accessibility, like where it says that students they are allowed to use the locker room so their privacy and safety, there can be accommodations made. But I'm also wondering whether that could be on the other side. Like if there's somebody who is a transgender student and there is somebody else who is cisgender and they feel uncomfortable, would it be allowed for accommodations to be made for those other students? Because I'm not sure exactly how this is going to be enforced or seen actually at the school level.
Yeah, I think you obviously talk with your principal in regard to what your needs are as a student. So if student government is seeing or hearing concerns regarding that, it's got a meeting with Mrs. Tobias and have that conversation. And we make a lot of accommodations for students on a daily basis. We do have a very large, in your case, high school, and we can consider accommodations. With that said, I don't know what the specific concerns or options somebody'd be requesting, but I think they'd want to see the principal and have that conversation.
Okay. Laura? Thanks. I think, and Amy, Dr. Bader alluded to the past history of how we've restructured and worked with policy and regulations, and I've expressed before concerns about that because we have moved so much out of policy. And to just say this is a big policy, sometimes the weeds really are where things happen, and different people's interpretation of this big policy may be different, intentionally or unintentionally. So on the one hand, I understand that idea. I also don't think that as board members we get to say, oh, well, not our responsibility because we turn over the administration regulations and we don't approve them. So I think it is incumbent on us when we have concerns or hear concerns to raise those. I did have a couple of specific questions regarding the regulations. And one is that a definitional one, it says that a legal name is a birth certificate. Is that always the case? Can't someone have I don't know how the thing, like if you change your name because maybe you former step-parent adopts you and you change your last name. The intent, I assume, is that...
Hey, Scott, if you want to weigh in.
I agree with you. Certainly there are processes and procedures whereby a legal name change can be undertaken.
Okay. I just wanted to double check that. And the other one is, I hope, in line with this, and it actually looked to me like we might want to add to the regulations under 216, which are student records, something specific about what's in here in terms of the gender pronouns and preferred name. And that also would refer to the paragraph that talks about a former student who changes names, because my name is different than it was at high school. I know I was able to get a revised transcript. I did have two particular comments. One, I think maybe what Rick is alluding to, under restroom accessibility, it's very specific, and it says the use of a single stall bathroom should be a matter of choice for a student. And it says transgender or not. So it's very specific there. That is not specifically said under locker room. And these will be the administrative regulations. I'm just expressing an opinion that I would prefer that the locker room also said transgender or not in terms of doing a accommodation for a student who did not feel safe or comfortable. That's just a personal statement of where I felt. And I had another question, which is under the athletics. There's a sentence that says, a student, however, would have to play in a team/sport based on that chosen agenda throughout that school year. Am I correct in thinking that means you can't identify one way in the fall and one in the spring, which I don't think would happen. I just want to make sure I understand the purpose of that sentence. Is that
related to PIAA regulation?
Chris isn't here, I don't know if he's online. My most recent reading, unless it's been changed in the last month, is that the PIAA leaves it up to the high school principal as to what they're going to do.
That's what I thought. That's why I was wondering what our intent with that sentence is. So that may be worth clarifying as these move forward. And then just one last comment, and again, this is not something that we usually get into these weeds, but I think, speaking for myself as well as some people who have spoken with me, one of the things that makes me very concerned is highlighted in the gender support plan that we saw last meeting, and that's in the second sentence. It says, school staff, caregivers, if appropriate, in parentheses, and the student should work together to develop this document. I would feel so much more comfortable if it said just caregivers and then had a sentence that said, under extraordinary circumstances, we understand maybe that the caregivers would not be part. But I think that sentence right up front is what makes me nervous, because I think except under extraordinary circumstances, the caregiver is absolutely always appropriate unless there's some particular thing.
So one of the unique aspects of that support plan was if a child came forward to us and it was a situation where they hadn't told their parents yet. one of the aspects of the plan is to help that student have that conversation. So I don't think kids are going to talk to us and allow us to help them as a team, with the counselor included, to work toward having their conversation with their parents. So I mean, I think we're in a tough spot there with that. So I think it does spell out, and maybe it needs more language, a unique situation. That's referenced in the admin regulations, and that's something that the counselors and our directors are working on at this time, to how's this going to work in their role. And I don't want to say, to Amy's point earlier, we've been supporting gender expansive and trans students for quite some time as a district. Ever since I've come here, we've been doing things to support. This is a much more profound step as a system to support those students. And I think we absolutely want to support the students and their families. And I think that's one of the main goals, if we had such a unique situation, is to have the team help that student have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think not only do we have counselors that are receiving as Dr. O'Donnell said, additional training in terms of how to manage these plans, but we also now have access to other mental health professionals who can be involved and have expertise in guiding that process. So it's not just a student coming to the district, and I just get the sense that there's like this implication that the district and would be working with a student, keeping some kind of secret. That's not the goal. These are mental health professionals that are working towards supporting that student and finding the path that's right for them, which is why it says when appropriate. Scott?
I think that's a great point, Amy. And I think it also what I took from Laurel's comment and even Bob's comment, I think this is where it's just really important for everybody to understand and recognize that this is a topic that is challenging for a lot of people, and that a lot of people don't understand, don't want to understand, haven't been exposed to it, therefore they don't, for whatever reason. And I feel for you, Bob, because I brought this up, and this is an administrative regulation, and it's not our approval, it's not our purview, and yet this conversation and this dialogue is something that's sorely missing in many of these areas, because if somebody doesn't hear the commentary, Amy, that you made about, yeah, these are mental health professionals, so they know what they're doing, they may read that and say, well, is this excluding the parents? And they need to hear that, no, there's a plan that actually works towards informing the parents, the caregiver, whoever might be, that's kind of the goal of things. And I think so much of this gets contentious, and we get stuck on the things that we disagree on, instead of trying to focus on how do we move through this and how do we have a dialogue. How do we tell people that you may agree or disagree with how the district is approaching athletics, but legally we can't approach it any other way. So people may not know that. People may think that it's a choice that we're making, and the reality is, the way executive orders and regulations and PIAA in Pennsylvania, works things right now, if I'm not mistaken, is that we don't have a choice in these things. There may be other things that we do have choices in that it's good for people to understand. So I'm sorry that this kind of gets belabored because it's the regulation, but I think in this topic, I think that this is an important conversation that the community may want to be involved in, to be able to have a dialogue and not just something else that just makes it a contentious disagreement.
And to your point, Scott, I think what the passage of this policy is and the implementation of these regulations will do is make visible the trust that students and, by association, their parents will begin to feel in the district because we're doing this in broad daylight, because we are making this just what we do through policy and through stated regulation and practice, and to the point, to your point, Laurel, I think that a thorough reading of that document would lead parents to see what Dr. O'Donnell's point was, that we are working to lead kids to feel okay, we're working to build relationships that are safe and available for understanding. And these policies, these regulations lay out the roadmap to make progress where conversations have been shut down before. We're literally working to help kids and teachers and family members and administration get on the same page and create understanding where experience has not allowed understanding before. And that's the optimism I feel in this. And I guarantee there will be bumps in the road. I guarantee that we'll probably, there may be some missteps, but those missteps will only lead to a greater understanding of how we can do better next time. And again, in saying, here's the road, everybody, that the kids will know that they have a place here.
And I think our openness to questions from parents as a district, our openness as a district is, we'll continue to communicate that openness to questions. And, this was, I think, a very specific example where it would be help that, as we've regularly communicating the mental health resources that we're providing to students, then parents become more aware of what processes are occurring in the district and, what access to mental health services their students have and who they can reach out to as well in schools to get support as parents if they, have concerns around certain issues.
I just wanted to affirm what you said, Lori, because I may have, in what I said, given the mistaken impression that parents are excluded. And it does say several times throughout here that the goal is to work toward parental involvement. I understand that. I still am concerned by, I think a tone is set at the beginning that may not be the intended tone, and that was why I called it out. But it absolutely, if you read through this, says more than once, as I recall, that the goal, you're working with the student towards a time when the student feels more comfortable dealing with the parents.
And the wording, by saying when appropriate, it's acknowledging, we have students who are fourth graders, we have students who are 12th graders, and how we approach, how district personnel are approaching kids at different stages of development might be different. Jim?
Yeah, so this policy is near and dear to my heart. And, when we talk about policy, we talk about the vision or the values or the beliefs of the board and what we want our school district to represent. And I want this vision for our school district going forward. I think this really encapsulates my beliefs as one board member around this issue. The other thing, when we talk about regulations, that's how the administration chooses to implement the vision, the direction, the values of the board. And when I look at this draft, this is a really good draft. This is, there's almost nothing here that I have a quibble with. I think this is really, I think that the administration has listened to the community, has reacted to some of the problems that we've had in the school district previously. And like Dr. O'Donnell said and Amy said, this isn't anything new. We've been doing this for years. This just codifies it, which goes back to the comments that one of our counselors made. We have your back.
I think it is really important.
I know Jean and Sri are online, and I know they've been sitting quietly. Do you have any questions of them? Just to point out that they've joined us. They've played a large role, obviously, Linda and CJ have as well. But that I want to acknowledge those two members of our team who aren't with us, but are technically with us.
Saria has her hand up.
Hi, Saria.
So something that I regularly bring up in spaces like this when we are discussing policies is I think that it's important that we remember that at times we may be discussing, for example, a policy on the use of a building or a policy on tickets, for example, to a game. When it comes to policies like these, we have to remember that we're discussing children. We are discussing children who hold identities within our district. We are discussing whether or not we feel that other people who may not identify similarly as these children should be able to weigh in on what rights they have, what access they have, what ability they have to be able to go to school every day and feel safe. And so I just, I do not feel I'd be doing my role as equity director justice if I did not bring forward to say that all policies are not equal in the fact that we have to recognize that in discussions that we may have students and families and parents of children who identify as transgender listening to our meetings, and as we discuss and debate, to recognize that we are discussing and debating the identities of children that navigate our buildings every day. So I think I just want to ensure that we are, and I believe that overall the discussion has been respectful to that, but I just want to make sure that I put that out there because I do believe our district has been doing a great job over the years, and this is another step in helping us to do even better. When we look for opportunities for a majority rules type opportunity or discussion in a space where a group is a minoritized or underrepresented group, we know that that is not a discussion that we're going to find a meeting of the minds to. What we do have to recognize, and I know the earlier speaker talked about moral conscience, is morally as individuals, as a district, and being able to support youth and help them to feel safe, help them to be able to have really difficult discussions with their parents. We hold a role there as educators, as counselors, as administrators, as supporters of youth. And that is the hope of those administrative regulations, that we are working to ensure that students have the biggest support system possible when it comes to navigating something in society that right now is difficult, but that we all hope that there comes a point in time, as Laura was describing earlier, that policies like this are not needed because a student's gender identity is not an aspect of themselves that they cannot wholly bring to school and navigate without having to worry about a sense of belonging. That's what we're hoping to get to. So I just want to thank everybody for the discussion and the questions, but also always to bring it back that this policy is about children. The policy before it is also about our employees and faculty and staff that identify as LGBTQ. We are talking about people here.
Thank you, Saria. That's really, I think, helpful and important thoughts to focus us on. Thank you. Okay. Other questions from the board? Then is there any public comment from anyone here? Yes, you may come up to the podium and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak if you could just introduce yourself and where you reside.
I'm Michelle Young, and I reside in Ferguson Township. I have 3 children in the district, 2 in middle school and 1 in elementary. I have made comments about some of this previously, but wanted to do so again since families have reached out to me with concerns. The question regarding the policy, does the board support the lack of notification to parents? We've had discussion here about intent. I participated or listened in on the policy meeting when this was discussed, the last 2 actually, and there's a lot of, and I truly question that because I'm uncomfortable with the lack of parental notification regarding counseling within the regulation. I'm not talking about that informal meeting where you've been, which is what the district has been doing for years, counseling students. I'm really addressing the regulation stating that a counselor can be assigned and a support plan put in place notionally without parent notification. During the last policy meeting, I felt that there was an assumption of parental abuse and that needing to ensure student safety against their parents. I was not the only person who felt that way in that discussion of the policy meeting. And as Laurel had alluded to before in regards to some of the tone of the policy, that's kind of how some of us felt, that I think that many parents would find it offensive that the district is acting upon such an assumption. In addition to that, there's been a lot of discussion about the high school and about counselors in the high school, but this policy has no boundaries. So you could notionally have a second grader that can reach out to a school counselor and say that there's low parental support, and the second grader would be assigned a counselor, receive counseling, and a support plan developed, all without parental notification. And if that student takes 6 months to get to notification, that's 6 months of counseling and activity without parents. And I can't think of another situation where that would be allowed without parental notification.
Thank you for your comment. Yes, if you'd like to introduce yourself again and where you reside in the district, and then you'll have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Spencer Chesney, Bollesburg. So I just wanted to say, actually, I 100% agree with Mr. Fozard in the sense that part of my feeling is that the administrative regulations are more malleable. And so they do require, all policies require community support, right? But administrative regulations are more malleable, so they're going to require more community support. And I do think that there has to be a conversation to discuss and educate people about issues. So particularly about this one about parental notification. I understand the concern, but I do think that just to underscore the importance of being able to protect students first. So, estimates are fuzzy, but there's probably tops 1%. So I just Googled it right now, but about tops 1% of students or people in the United States are identified as trans. But 40% of all youth that are homeless in this country are transgender. 1 out of every 10 transgender student is thrown out of their family's house currently. And so I do think those statistics are real, are current, and are sobering to recognize that there are many families that are not supportive of transgender students affirming their identity. They will lose their family if they say that, sorry. And so being able up front to say to the students, we may or may not, it's up to you if you want to include your parents. We will have this friendly conversation, and we hope that you can, but we are here for you regardless of whether or not your parents are supportive. And for the second grader, I can tell you that the first time the second grader tells you or wants to say to somebody, I'm not the gender you think I am, the first person they're telling is their parents. The only time they go to the school and say, I don't want to tell my parents, and I'm not saying that it happens probably a lot with the second grader, is they already know, I'm terrified of my parent. I can't tell this to my parents. I have to hide this from my parent. They don't come to the school first to tell these things. They tell the person that's most intimate to them, and they've already been rejected. And so the school, I think, is doing the right thing of providing the community support that is lost for these students. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if you could introduce yourself and where you reside in the district, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Sure. Alana Chesney from Bollesburg. And so I guess I agree with a lot of what the last speaker just shared. I also just wanted to comment on the notion of while I agree that having education for our community to help understand sort of why we have these policies, why they're important for our students, is really important. I do think when we think about how they're developed and what goes into them, it's not just a sense of what we think might be best, right? There are best practices, there are national standards for these things. And I know just from the work that our work group did in collaboration with the policy committee and others, is that we really look to those. We look to the GLSEN national model for what are the recommendations to go into things like policy and what's in the administrative regulations. We're also not the first district to be considering a policy like this. There are many others in the state of Pennsylvania. And so I think when we think about what's actually in here and what are the important things to be considering, it's not what I think might be best or what you think might be best, but really, looking at what are the national standards and best practices that we know are important and helpful for our students. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Is anyone else present who would like to make a public comment? And then I'll move on to those who are joining remotely. All right. Is anyone who is joining us remotely interested in making a public comment? You can raise your. I don't know if I should have my microphone on. It's off. Yeah. Okay. Oh, no, you turned it on. I don't see any hands raised. If you'd like to raise your hand, if you'd like to make a public comment. Okay. All right, so with that, board members, anything else, and then we'll have a roll call. All right, thanks, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Bader? Yes. Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard? Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Thanks, everyone. So we'll try to move through the action items, and then we'll take a short break before information discussion, if that's okay. Item G is a motion to authorize the board representatives to approve the appointment of the SPPA consultant with the SPPA working group, and this is shown in attachment 6G.
Duffy, so moved.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? We talked about it a little bit before. Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item H is a motion to approve the virtual learning MOU with the State College Area Education Association, and this is shown in attachment 6H. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard? Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed.
Thanks for your work on that.
Yeah.
Very much.
Thank you. Item I is a motion to approve the change order for the bus garage paving project as shown in attachment 6I.
Duffy, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Any public comment? All right, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard? Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item J is a motion to approve the maintenance agreement with Ingersoll Rand for the CPC large compressor as shown in attachment 6J.
Leah, so moved.
Duffy, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Any public comment? We'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard? Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes. Item K is a motion to approve the purchase and installation of cooling equipment for the Park Forest Middle School kitchen, and this is shown in attachment 6K. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Or any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Fazard? Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item L is a motion to approve the 2021-2022 expulsion waiver agreement, number 1. There's no attachment for this item. Is there a motion and a second?
Duffy, so moved.
Leah,
Okay, that's been moved and seconded, and we'll have a roll call vote on that item.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Vader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes,
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazard?
that item has passed. At this time, we'll take a 5-minute break or so, and then we'll reconvene. So we are temporarily adjourned. Okay, well, go ahead and start getting ready to reconvene. All right. I'll call the meeting back to order. The next item under information discussion is fiscal stewardship, 2021-2022 athletic ticket pricing update, and we have Randy Brown here at the table to talk with us about just an update on this.
Wanted to provide an update. You have a memo in your packet. It's pretty self-explanatory. Let me just summarize very briefly that back on July 19th, you had approved a e-ticketing platform called Hometown Ticketing to be used for athletic events. At that meeting, we understood that the fees for processing with Hometown Ticketing would be passed on to the purchaser. However, in our implementation, we found that we did not agree with that process, and so that is going to hinder or limit our revenue this year slightly. But we'd like to understand the use of that. We'd like to understand all of the capabilities and any cost reductions that we are able to incur by having fewer folks working at the games, collecting and selling the tickets. So we just wanted to give you an update, let you know that you can be aware of that, so that we go on the record for you to understand that. If you have any other questions, let us. Now's an opportunity for you to ask.
So this would be something we'll monitor going in, so that.
Obviously, yes, we'll be monitoring what all is incurred and like I said, all of those other factors. And then we'll make a recommendation for next year when we bring a ticket pricing structure. Obviously, now that we're in our Memorial Field facility, updated facility, as well as moving hopefully out of the pandemic very soon, or at least having some differences than we did last year with some of our other events, we will possibly be looking at some of our ticket pricing and make some recommendations for next year.
Well, I think being able to buy tickets for football games online already has been, it's incredibly convenient, so,
Some
for
people,
parents to.
Right. Well, like I said, we just want to understand how much more we can reduce some of our other costs to help offset that before we move forward and decide whether it's we do want to encourage people to use that, so charging that fee to them is a deterrent. However, we probably will be looking at a game day price versus a pre-sale price in order to help, again, encourage that pre-sale pricing so that we can have fewer and fewer tickets being purchased. And then that's less cash and less people that we need to have on site for some of those responsibilities. Okay?
Questions? Jim?
And there are other vendors in this area, so that was a one-year agreement, or is that a?
I believe that it was a one-year agreement.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So.
This vendor was chosen because of its specialty with high school sports.
Oh, okay.
And we did look at a couple others, but this did seem to have the best capabilities for us. But we will monitor and come back with a decision for next year. Or a proposal for next year that you will decide, excuse me.
Other questions? Okay. All right, thank you. There's no further board action regarding this item. The next item is also under fiscal stewardship. We're going to be looking at the ARP Esser funding communication plan update. So Randy will walk us through this as well.
Correct. And again, this is just to go on record with you as the board and also the community that with the ARP Esser, or ARP Esser as we sometimes refer to it, we have received over $5.6 million in funding, as well as a state set-aside allocation that we've just been made aware of recently. 1.5 million of that is for lost learning opportunities, and then the remaining $4 million, it has much more flexibility, and its intent, as we have been budgeting, is to balance our lower revenues over this time period. There is a public input component, and so why we're here tonight is to let you know that more details related to our proposal and our application will be discussed at an upcoming CCL meeting, and then at the October 4th meeting, there's no board requirement, but we want you to have an understanding of what we're looking at and proposing, as well as the opportunity for the public, if they have any comments or questions, that will give them 2 opportunities as well to provide feedback.
And maybe some of these board copies, I don't know if we could have like a little bit of information, maybe not for this week, but in the future, maybe if the timing worked out to have some info available, just like a one-pager.
We could do that, yes.
Laurel?
So, did I understand correctly that we will not have to take an action on the grant proposals?
That's correct.
And what do they give you any guidelines in terms of what their thinking is on why public input?
I think it's because it was such a large amount of funding.
Okay.
That's also often part of, like the Title I stuff, there's a requirement for community input and participation. So a lot of the federal dollars, I think, often have some ties like that.
Yeah, I appreciate your making the announcement ahead of time so people can know that, because I think sometimes Title I is a good example. It's there, and it's often done in a somewhat perfunctory way, so I appreciate the heads up
Sure.
for the community as well as us.
And some of these things, I mean, when you talk about social, emotional, and health needs, we've been working on the relationship partnerships. Some of the resources will help fund those. Last year, we looked to the foundation to help us with some of this. This definitely plugs in with some of the things we've been working on. And then there's some other ideas that came through the district in regard to how we can better support students with some of the academic things, lost learning, but also just ramping up as we kind of talked a little bit earlier with the high school principals before the meeting about, right now, so some of the kids they're ramping up academics, but also all the extracurriculars are ramping up. So their plates are full, and how we can support students as they get back to a way of life that it's been a while, right?
Lori?
I'm a big fan of the one-sheeter for the community, for sure. Did I say something? Is that fun? Okay, I didn't know that was funny, but yay me. Okay, and then
Just accurate.
in terms of the community feedback for CCL and on the October 4th board meeting, would that just happen through public comment? Is that how people, okay. So is there a way to, on that one-page document, make sure that that's clear, but then maybe also on those agendas, make a special note that particular amounts of time will be given just for this? You know what I mean? Just to make it as clear as possible that this is what this is for.
We're creating
a
venue
space.
for this, yeah.
Right.
Lori, that's a good point. And in terms of agenda development, I think that's a
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it's a
point that's
separate,
important.
we have public comment for this, and then we have public comment for.
But, in
other
terms of
items.
there's a stakeholder, the IU's having a stakeholder meeting just today, actually, to deal with this particular issue and try to engage as many people as possible in the system
Yeah,
to really respond to the situation that the IU finds itself in.
yeah.
I think our challenge is we're also dealing with, balancing lower revenue with increased costs. So,
Yeah.
because that 5.6 million won't be enough if we, you know what I mean? Because that's my fear of just saying there's an open check here. Do what you will, because we are dealing with some real strategic challenges on our plate with where we are with revenue. So I think we'll have to explain that. So I think that the one sheeter is a good idea, and we'll be there to support you, and also, listen to people. And we've been using data and challenges that we are aware of to drive some of the thinking behind this, and obviously looking to our team around the district too. So.
Agreed.
Laurel?
Comment can be written as well, is that correct?
Sure.
Okay, I just wanted to double check that.
Jim?
No, just a quick question about the 1.5 million for lost learning opportunities. Are we responsible for a plan for that?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we'll be sharing with you, is how we're using those resources to help overcome those and that lost learning, provide that lost learning.
Okay.
But understand that a large portion of that can also be social and emotional supports as well.
Right, okay,
Yep.
great.
All right. Other questions? Okay, thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks.
All right, then moving on to item C, policy development. The proposed new policy 012 on board superintendent responsibilities. And I'll let Dr. O'Donnell provide an overview of the proposed policy. This, came out of, ongoing discussions really over the past few years in terms of wanting to maybe codify some of our institutional memory about how we tend to function around here and how we think we should. So I'll turn it over to Dr.
And
O'Donnell.
we have talked about, it's even in my past contract, the job description.
Right.
So what's your job, my job? Now, this policy though represents board and really the administrative team. So, because there are a lot of aspects of what we do that are led by other people in the district, not simply the superintendent. It's designated or designated, and that's denoted in here. So, when in the spring, Amber, Amy, and I had some discussions regarding some drafts that I was working on with our district team to help to flesh this out. How would this look? And obviously, it's trying to take down a large, complex organization, and there's a lot more to operating the district than just this document. But I do think it looks at what are the biggest functions and roles that we play, and who has what role in regard to the board and the superintendent. And I hope that the format with organization, with the framework chart, so to speak, at the top, and then more details below for someone who would, it's really a reference tool as well, not just for us, but also for the community. The number of times I think you receive emails about certain decisions that I make, that people look to you, well, why did you do that as a board? And it's not necessarily, so it may help to clarify, hey, that's his role. Or if it's that something you made, say the policy discussion, when you said, well, the board, the policy's in place. So that really is kind of some of the backdrop. And we have had many discussions about roles over the years. So I think opening it up for discussion, there was some conversation in committee, suggestions or feedback on the draft as you see it. I don't know if Amy and Amber, you want to weigh in on anything else, or if we just want to hear their thoughts.
I think that was a good summary. Yeah. And we kind of rehashed this a little bit when we presented it on the committee. I think this encapsulates a lot of our professional development we've done together, our protocols, our conversations through your evaluations and contracts and other things that we've gone through. It brings all that stuff together. All in one place, so future boards members can have a hopefully good understanding. And you also used, we talked about, I know some other districts, was it Lower Merion was one that we had looked at a little bit?
Mount Lebanon had one that was, there are districts that have them, that exist. I think looking to School Boards Association, we see it a little more fleshed out.
Okay. So they did have something.
So there are some, some districts do have it defined, some are pretty thin. I think this takes an attempt to define it with a fairly high-level piece on the front end and then a little more detail on the back.
All right. Board member questions or input? Dan?
Yeah. This is relatively minor, but it fleshes out something I think that came up in the policy committee meeting itself. At the time, David asked about the ways in which, in terms of our working together as a team, that we are assessing the district's progress as they implement the policies, how can we determine to what extent that the policies that are in place are effective? And it's important to say, just for those listening in, that there's a relationship between the superintendent and the administration and the school board, which basically works this way. In theory, the school board's responsible for developing policy, and this administration, under the leadership of the superintendent, is responsible for implementing that policy. So when David brought this up in the committee meeting, and we touched base about this afterwards, it led to some language, just a minor change to the policy section on, let me see the page we're talking about here.
Page 4.
Page 4, yeah, that would essentially, let me find this. Come on. So under the first item, and it could be anywhere within the superintendent's list, but what we suggested was that there be some language added that would basically say the superintendent oversees ongoing assessment of district progress as policies are implemented. And then beyond that, and then goes on to say, and advises the board in areas needing policy development and or revision. So it just simply makes more objective the responsibility in terms of the actual action as you're implementing policy. You'll be learning to see what the impact is on the district and how the district's doing in implementing policy. So David and I talking about it, thought there'd be value in making that, put that in black and white, basically.
Yeah, I think there's, as I tried to articulate, I think there's value, and it's, obviously, it's there's no one set way to do this or no one appropriate way, but just the idea that it's important for the board to be informed as to whether the things that we put in place are being effective. And to have some mechanism so it's a feedback loop, so we know whether or not you've done the right thing, because you don't always know that, sometimes you have unintended consequences. And so I think it's important for us to be aware of that. And just so there's an informal way for, not that we're saying there has to be any particular way, it has to be appropriate to what the situation is, but.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to say it's happening anyway.
Yeah.
I say, how could you be in that, have that responsibility and not be alert to the ways in which implementation is impacting the school district? And you're likely going to have that kind of that knowledge base. So, and I think from David, your smart conversation, let's just acknowledge that and just say that, and then that goes on to be used in terms of advising the board in areas needing policy development and or revision. So that information would inform us.
So I think here's a question for you, for ongoing evaluation, because of the volume of policies.
Right.
My thought initially is, and I don't disagree, because I think how, evaluating policy implementation, but I think it should be a charge from the board, so that, because we have policies we haven't even talked about for 20 years.
Right.
So which one do you want because it's not possible to do them all.
Right.
What's the focus? So maybe there's one under the board charges the superintendent for particular evaluations or something.
Yeah.
And then under, yes, we could tweak that other one. I do think it's a one-to-one, correspondence.
So, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it has to be a conversation. I mean, as the superintendent, you would be aware of things. The board really needs to be aware that this is how this is working out. And there may be times when the board says, well, we really want information about this. Right. And so it's got to be a cooperative, we're not going to be aware of everything that's going on. We can't possibly. Right. And so you will be more likely to be aware of this is an issue here that you probably need to be aware of. And there are occasions when the board will specifically say, well, we'd like feedback on a particular item. I mean, that happens sometimes, but I think you're probably in a much better position to know what items are of importance in terms of the board being informed.
Well, and I think one of the areas that I really want to see us improve upon with progress is strategic plan. I think the measures should be very visible to the community, not just in a large report that relates to a survey, the actual short list, things of that nature. So we're working with Justin on our big change recently to develop a plan so that we can do that. But I think from the policy standpoint, I think it should be in there. I think it should be, there needs to be clarity though, because we have so many policies.
Oh, yeah, right, exactly. You can't be, that's an impossible task.
Right.
You couldn't do anything else.
Maybe that's a discussion when we do the annual work session on annual priorities. Right. Say we want feedback on. Yeah.
Sure. Maybe what we could do afterwards is just see if there's some ways we can tweak this and make this more aligned better with what would make sense.
Yeah, how about we work on it? I would think it should, if this can go, we'll look at the timing of policy committee.
You
Maybe
bet.
put one on the
Have
docket
another-
here.
That'd be good.
Have
That
another
sounds good.
iteration there.
That sounds good. Sounds good to me. If that's okay with Lori.
I wasn't sure, if your focus in asking for this is primarily perhaps newer policies? Like, for example, we recently passed a homework policy a couple years ago. So how did that?
Yeah.
So that might be something we might be more interested in, how that implementation of that, how's that working out in practice?
Yep.
Some of the policies that are more,
Yeah.
Operational or.
They were, the policy being policy, which is as much as anything, a set of values. We're just trying to encourage to be acted upon. So, and when we have a new policy and I wouldn't say it's ambiguous, but it's still not as well defined as we would like in terms of actual implementation. It'd be nice to know how it went, and whether that implementation suggested that the revision for that policy is needed. So.
Lori?
I really like the idea of, an annual review. What is it that we want to talk about? And I think things like homework would probably logically come up. And I also think that we do a lot of this just in terms of reviewing our policies,
Right.
It's just part of the practice of the policy committee, not only to create policy, but also to review existing policy. So I think there's something natural that's already occurring. So what we're talking about is being more selective about particularities that may have been new or, as Amber said, really operational based, aiming for particular results in the first place. So just my observation of conversation.
Laura?
Yeah, thanks. When I'd seen this thought, I had been looking anyway at the Mount Lebanon policies, because that was one of the ones that was cited as a draft. And they actually have a line that just, under their policies, it just says, keep the board informed as to the effectiveness of policies. So if you're looking for language, that might be just something we can crib from them.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the sense I'm getting from what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're right.
I had a couple of specific questions in terms of how these are laid out. In particular, there were two particular areas. One is about strategic plan, and in this, the role of the board is to approve the plan and would participate with the community, but all of the development and guiding processes with the superintendent. And looking at that with Mount Lebanon, it is sort of somewhat flipped around. And to me, the strategic plan is so key to the whole district and the oversight of the district and the vision of the district that I think that to put the board just as approving it.
Well, Laura, so today what the mistake I made was strategic plan. We had it up top, then we didn't have it down below. So if you look at what's on the agenda.
On page 6.
It says there's 3 aspects to the board, and this is obviously up for discussion because we had the details up under general, and I think it needs to be called out as a separate. So participates in strategic plan development, because I thought about what did we do? The board did participate in the plan development. Approves a multi-year, obviously that's not a change, and then requires superintendent to provide the board with annual progress updates. So those are the 3. I was just thinking upon what are the key areas. And then under the superintendent assesses the needs to inform planning, so we gathered all the data and things like develops, proposes it, and then provides annual progress updates. So I hope that fleshes it out. I agree with you. There's a little more than just simply approve there. But I'm game to have further discussion around that.
Maybe when we do the next policy committee meeting, the strategic planning section might be somewhere to zoom in on a little bit. Because we've had, several of us have been through a couple of strategic plan processes so far, so we're probably in a good position to reflect on what, how we want that to be codified. So.
And then there was one other that jumped out at me, and that was the community engagement piece in particular, and I think this is really for some discussion of something I've raised a couple of other times. We have these CACs, and they're supposed to be advisory to the board, and there may also be a value in the superintendent having his or her own advisory committees. This says that the superintendent is the board's liaison with appointed advisory committees, and if that is referring to the CACs, my own feeling is that that's something the board needs to develop its own liaisons, which in effect is what we've done in the past. So I'm curious about whether these are different advisory committees or whether you're seeing that as a shift.
I assume this is a different, like, that he may be a liaison with advisory committees, but the CACs, we have board liaisons for.
Well,
Okay, so the advisory committees wasn't the CACs.
Yeah,
That's the shorter version of my question.
But there's designees, so like, for example, finance, CAC, Randy. So that's not me, it's a designee. So I do think there is an administrative or superintendent liaison, because obviously Randy brings all the information.
Right.
So yeah, I think we can, if you want to tweak, and the community engagement one, there has been some feedback around that. We made a little bit of a tweak there. So yeah,
Yes, I agree on the liaison. It was more because it said the board's liaison that I was questioning, because we've had but absolutely the administration needs to be a liaison with the advisory.
Yeah, and maybe it's board participation in the advisory, because you have board representation on each of those community advisory committees.
Yeah.
Because this is beyond, so when we started the Inclusive Excellence, it really was, I started that as an advisory to me.
Right.
And the equity work groups technically are advisory to the administration.
Right.
They haven't been charged by the board. Now, board members have conversations, some of you co-chair, you're involved as community members as well, and obviously you're always a board member. But I think that's a little different than a CAC.
Yeah, we have a couple different kinds of structures that work differently, so. And maybe because we're working at the level of policy, it needs to be written in a general enough manner that we're not recreating the wheel a bit, because I think we already have a policy on committees and CACs.
And I think what you're doing with your 3 community conversations coming up, we kind of codified that in number 2, like the board shall periodically provide community members the opportunity to discuss district matters with members of the board. Obviously, accessibility through the pandemic, we've taken a back seat to what we used to do, and we're trying to get that back up and running. What we did with the high school referendum, the outreach on that was insane. I'm not suggesting we'll go back to that level of outreach, but I do think what you're doing right now with providing access to you is a step.
I was thinking, is it still in that section?
No, just overall.
So the one maybe tweak that I wanted to look at was number 5 under board and community engagement and relations. It says channels of resolution of complaints or grievances through established district protocol. And I guess maybe channels communication of question, because I think part of this is questions too, and requests for information, because in my experience in community engagement and just the kind of questions I get on the most frequent basis from people in the community, it's not necessarily a complaint per se, but they want to know, how do you do X, Y, Z, or who do you contact if you want to ask about whatever. And so channeling, so it's not necessarily that we're channeling complaints or grievances, often it's just like channeling a
For information.
information or routing, yes. Like, oh, you would want to talk, if it's something regarding counseling services, you could reach out to the counseling office at the high school, or, often we have a lot of tacit information, people ask us a lot of questions. So often it's about routing people, whether it's a complaint. So it's not necessarily just complaints, it's like complaints, questions, or information requests.
Right. I think obviously the most sensitive issues where people want board members to solve their problems.
Right.
So we try to follow that procedural piece to the one policy. But yeah, so you'd like to reflect on that one and include questions in there?
Yeah, maybe just broaden it a little bit, or include a little bit more. I guess, but just in terms of my lived experience, like I get complaints sometimes, but much more often just get questions. So. Laura?
The other thing that jumped out at me in here is something about goals. Somewhere having that in here is part of it, part of our responsibility as well as the administration's. Establishing, monitoring annual goals.
Yeah. That's a good idea. I think to add a section on that.
I do think strategic planning, it could jive there. 'Cause when we talk about our annual priorities, a lot of the actions we prioritize jive with the goals. So they are a means toward that. But then there are operational things, obviously facilities, and, so those are annual priorities that you could probably struggle aligning them sometimes with the strategic planning goals. So, yeah. So maybe we either there or under the general section.
Yeah, it's on the general section, Bob, on your section regarding superintendent and designee, number 9 reads, develop strategic goals and priorities for the district, as well as respective action plans.
Dan, sorry, we bumped that under strategic plan, but yes, how about if we consider putting something like that back in for the annual work? So let me just make sure I have the most up to date.
I was at, just now, let's see, where was it? Page 4.
I don't see a 9.
Yeah, Dan, you're looking at it earlier.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. But so we shifted that to strategic planning, Dan. We shifted that to strategic planning, but that was the only tweak we made in there that if you refresh your what's on the agenda.
Okay.
It's in there. But we
I'll go
could,
back and find
for
it.
the annual priorities and goals, we can place that in the general section. How about if we take that back to committee with whether it goes there or strategic plans?
You bet.
I have a question. So under board, I don't know what page I'm on, it doesn't say. Under board number 3, actively participates in programs that build good community relations. What does programs mean?
Your coffees. Maybe we pick a better word. Than
I thought
programs.
that, but then I thought that was in number 2
Ah.
because it says periodically provide community members the opportunity to discuss school district matters. And I'm like, oh, that's a coffee. And then I read number 3 and it's a program. And I'm like,
Right.
what program?
Events, maybe?
Yeah, maybe events would be more appropriate. So if we.
Well, I just got confused if it was within like a SCASD program or an external program. And what am I not doing that I'm supposed to be?
Right, no. So say we embark on the middle level review again. We're going to have forums, for example. So maybe events, because when we went through the student day process, board members attended all that outreach, the forums that we had, for example. So maybe.
I guess to me that would be event, not program.
Yeah.
And that
Program
goes,
sounds formal.
Well, program
or
sounds like you're
it's
signing up for
curriculum.
something and then it's a continuous thing.
Right, right.
right.
Or like, like you're being taught something, which I'm happy to be taught something, but I don't think that's what the meaning is here.
Right.
How formal is the commitment that you're making? Right.
Yeah. But if it's what you're talking about, I guess event would.
But then there's also like all the informal things that we end up doing as board members, like you get asked to speak at like an AAUW forum or, and in those things, you're not necessarily representing the board per se, but we do a lot of community events and outreach, like a.
Well, what if it said, instead of programs, events, and I was thinking of the word outreach, events and outreach, because outreach is broad and really, the category would
Right.
fit all these examples that you're, that you
Right.
can think of.
Yeah.
And I just did something I said I would never do, which is to edit at the table. But guilty.
Okay, so in number 3, events and outreach. Yeah.
This is probably too specific to add to this document, but something for us to consider is, at one time we considered board members reaching into the PTOs, and developing relationships there.
Right.
I thought I'd toss that out.
Just, if you're going to commit to it, don't overcommit. If
For
you're going
board
to write
members that are
that check, you
available
got
at
to
that
cash
time of
it.
day,
Right.
yeah.
Or in the evening.
Yeah.
Winter evenings, yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's,
Yeah.
I think the question more is, do we want to do it, I guess is your,
Yeah.
so that's, maybe that's at
Do we want to
the
require
priorities. And
ourselves to do it?
actually, at the communications committee meeting, that's something that maybe can be raised there, because we're going to meet this Wednesday. Jim and I will check in. I know at the very least, we want to check in on what are some of the questions we have for community members who come to the outreach that you're doing, but also, obviously, you're going to be doing a lot of listening. Some people are going to want to share, they're not going to want to answer your questions. But they might, right?
Yeah, and I guess, like when you think about some of the more formal events that we attend, like related to schools, that probably falls within this category of events and outreach that build community relations.
Yeah, there's everything from, awards.
Senior award ceremonies.
Presentations,
Yeah.
also things like design charrettes that we had around the stadium, things like that, where we get community participation and board participation.
Or, other situations where we might participate in something in a school event that we're invited to, or the teacher invites us into. Yeah. We don't have anything in here regarding board communication and relations with faculty and staff, and we might want to have a line in here. And I don't want to write it at the table tonight, but
Right.
something in regard to.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Our responsibility to build
Relationships.
strong relationships with, yeah.
To be added.
Yes.
I think under personnel,
Oh, under personnel.
that might, unless you want to put it in community relations, but I think,
Right, work better under the personnel.
I think so.
I think that makes sense. Other suggestions? if you have feedback that you'd like to give in writing, then it could go to the policy committee for the next policy meeting. And if you could copy me and Bob on that as well, since we're not, or I'm not a member of the committee.
Will the changes be highlighted in red so that we will, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're in an alternate color.
Now that. Policy committee.
Yeah, I'm using blue, so you can see.
Anything to make Jim happy.
I'm chromatically challenged, so, yeah.
We'll use strike through as well. So,
Yeah.
Yep, okay. All right, anything else on that before we move on?
Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll do our committee reports, and if we could just share if there's anything from the committee that you would like to report that was not covered in the meeting minutes. So I'll start with Jim.
Well, I was just going to say we're going to have a committee meeting for the communications committee on Wednesday.
Right.
And we're going to talk about, some of the things we need to have in place, some of the likely topics that will come up at the community conversation. So think about that and think about, what supporting material, maybe not for Friday, but for subsequent ones that we might need to take with us, like the one pager that Lori spoke about so eloquently earlier. So that's the main crux of our discussion.
So it might be, if anyone has stuff they want to send in to the policy, or not policy, communications committee. Right, great.
So I'd appreciate it.
I'm
just
sorry.
I'm sorry. Any of the committee members, if you have any topics you'd like to talk about or anybody else, just send them to me and we can put them on the agenda.
Sounds good.
So, thank you.
Policy committee, Lori?
Well, Amy graciously.
That's
shared that
right.
for me because
Right.
I was
Sorry.
not well enough to do that.
Oh, yeah, so other things that we covered, it was mostly the policies that we brought forward.
Yeah, I think it's all in the minutes.
All of them, so I
yeah.
don't know, there wasn't really anything else that we.
Finance and audit committee, Scott?
Everything was discussed today.
Okay. All right, so you can see the upcoming meetings listed out on the board agenda. And with that, I would like a motion to adjourn the meeting to executive session.
Grant, so moved.
Duffy second.
Okay. All in favor of adjourning? Aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we are adjourned then.